My ex-fiancée slept with my brother right before our wedding. Now, 12 years later, she's back. My ex-girlfriend, who hooked up with my brother the night before our wedding, just got back in touch with me after 12 years. The kicker? She reached out exactly 1 week before I am about to marry the woman I love. This time, though, I'm not just going to ignore it. I want payback. I am 38 years old now, and in less than a week, I will be marrying my amazing girlfriend, who is 35. We have been together for 4 years, and she is everything I ever wanted. This is actually my second engagement. 12 years ago, I was supposed to marry my high school girlfriend, but things fell apart in the most insane way possible. That ex-girlfriend, who is also 38 now, and I were together for almost a full decade. We had even been living together for 5 years, so marriage felt like the natural next step. As far as I knew back then, we were both all in. My family absolutely adored her, and they were over the moon when I told them we were getting married. But that wedding never happened, and for damn good reason. The day before we were supposed to say our vows, my ex slept with my younger brother. He was 34 at the time. The night before the wedding, my ex suggested that I stay at a hotel while she stayed at home. She said it was bad luck for us to see each other before the ceremony, and I figured, sure, why not? I wanted to make her happy. A few hours after I checked into the hotel, I realized I had left my shoes back at the house. They were important to me, the pair I planned to wear when I walked down the aisle, so I had no choice but to go back and grab them. When I got to the house, I noticed something weird right away. The living room lights were off. That stood out to me because my ex always left the lights on, even when she left a room for just a minute. It was one of her quirks, so seeing the place dark made me wonder what was going on. I headed straight to the bedroom, since that was where I had left the shoebox. The second I opened the door, my stomach dropped. There she was in our bed with my own little brother. They were so into each other, they did not even realize I was standing right there at first. When they finally noticed me, all I could do was stand there, frozen. My brain just shut down. Everything I thought I knew about my life collapsed right then and there. The second it hit me, what I was actually seeing, I bolted. I did not say a word. My ex was calling after me, but I was already halfway out the door. I jumped in my car and drove back to the hotel, shaking so bad I could barely keep my hands on the wheel. My chest felt tight, and my mind kept replaying what I had just seen like a messed up movie I could not turn off. I was supposed to be getting married the next day. It felt completely unreal. When I finally made it back to the hotel room, I sat there on the bed, staring at the wall, trying to convince myself it was all some kind of nightmare. When reality sank in, I broke down. I cried so hard my whole body hurt. The only upside was that I had never told my ex which hotel I was staying at, so she could not come find me. All she could do was blow up my phone with messages. At first, I read them, but every word made me angrier. She was trying to tell me it was a one-time mistake, that it did not mean anything. I knew better. Then she said she was freaking out about the wedding, and my brother was just someone she felt comfortable talking to. That led to them crossing a line, apparently. I could not believe she was trying to justify any of it. I blocked her without another word. I blocked my brother too. I was not interested in hearing a damn thing from either of them. It took me a while to pull myself together, but I did. First thing I did was cancel every single wedding plan we had made, no matter how much money I lost. I figured a few $1,000s was a small price to pay to get the hell away from her. She had wasted 10 years of my life. I was not going to give her one more second. The next thing I did was call my parents. I told them everything. They did not even know what to say at first. They were stuck between feeling sorry for me and wondering what they were supposed to do about my brother. I told them to take their time figuring it out. It was already late, so I ordered some food, ate a little, then cried myself to sleep. Since that night, I have only seen my ex twice. Once when she came by to pack up her stuff and move out. The second time was at a friend's party a couple of years later. She tried to come over and talk to me, but I saw her first and left before she could say a word. As for my brother, I have not said a single word to him since that night. My parents cut him off completely after they found out what he did. Last I heard, he was living somewhere in Europe, and it has been at least 3 years since he has come back home. That whole mess feels like ancient history now. I moved on. I built a good life. I met a woman I actually trust with my whole heart, and in just a few days, we are getting married. Everything was going great, Until about a week ago, when my ex crawled out of the woodwork and found me again. I have no idea how she even found out I was getting married, but she messaged me from some brand new Facebook account since her old one was still blocked. She sent message after message, saying how crushed she was to hear I was moving on. One thing stuck out to me, though. She kept talking like we had actually been married before, even though we never made it down the aisle. Weird little details like that made the whole thing feel surreal, like I was reliving the past all over again. She begged me to talk to her. She said I was the only man she had ever truly loved. It stirred something up in me, I cannot lie. Not because I wanted her back, but because part of me wanted to make sure she never dared contact me again. I told my fiancée everything right away. She knows about my past, so I wanted her to know what was going on. I told her how torn I felt. Half of me wanted to tell my ex off and get some closure, and the other half wanted to make her feel the kind of pain she made me feel all those years ago. My fiancée understood completely. She has been cheated on before too, so even though her past was not a 10-year relationship, she knew what betrayal felt like. We talked it over and came up with a plan, something to make sure my ex would never forget what she did to me. That is why, a couple of hours after I got her message, I made up my mind and replied. I told her I was finally ready to have conversation. She jumped at the chance and said she could head over to my house right that minute if I wanted. But I was not about to let her anywhere near my place, so I told her to book a room at a nearby hotel instead. I said I would meet her there the next day. It was a perfect excuse to keep her away from my fiancé, who was sitting next to me the entire time I was messaging her. My fiancé knew exactly what was going on and was completely on board. So, the next day, right on time, I showed up at the hotel room we agreed on. The moment she saw me, my ex lit up like a Christmas tree. Her eyes were already full of tears, and she was smiling like she had just won the lottery. But she had no clue those tears were about to turn real fast. She asked me to sit down, and before I could say much of anything, she launched into this long, emotional speech. She said she had spent the last 12 years regretting what happened and wanting to make it right. She had no idea how to get through to me until she found out, through some friend, that I was getting married again. That was when she knew she could not stay silent any longer. She said she had to reach out one last time before I disappeared from her life forever. I sat there, nodding along, acting like I was listening closely. I even held her hands while she talked, just to sell it. In reality, I was not paying much attention at all. I was just counting down the minutes until my fiancé got there. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I jumped up and opened it without a word. My fiancé walked in first, followed by all my groomsmen and her bridesmaids. The best part? Every single one of them was wearing a mask with my brother's face on it. On top of that, they were carrying a cake, and right in the middle of the frosting was my brother's big, stupid smile. My ex froze in place. Her jaw literally dropped, and for a second, I swear she could not even figure out how to breathe. We all yelled surprise, like it was some big celebration. She just sat there, looking like her brain was trying to catch up with what was happening. Convincing the hotel staff to let everybody in was surprisingly easy. Since she had already told the front desk to let her guests come up without a hassle, they just waved my whole crew right through. She had assumed the only guest would be me. She should have known better. Once the shock wore off, my ex completely fell apart. She started crying so hard she could barely get a word out. I was not about to feel bad for her, though. She was the one who thought it was okay to pop back into my life, uninvited, a week before I was marrying someone else. After what she did with my brother, she deserved every second of this. I told her straight to her face that this was exactly what she had coming. I said if she really believed there was even the slightest chance I would ever take her back, she was out of her mind. She had no business contacting me at all, and if she felt humiliated, well, that was her own doing. I kept my voice flat and cold the whole time. I wanted her to understand that I did not feel a shred of sympathy. She kept sobbing and saying if I really did not want her back, I should have just ignored her instead of going out of my way to embarrass her like this. But I was not buying that for a second. I had no guilt then, and I still do not now. Before I walked out of that hotel room, I told her to never contact me again, not ever. I left her there, sitting on the edge of the bed, cried her eyes out, surrounded by all those ridiculous masks. Now I've got only 2 days left before my wedding, but there is one big problem. A A few of my fiancé's bridesmaids are acting like I went too far. They're saying I should apologize to my ex, even though they know what she did. They think no matter how bad her behavior was, nobody deserves public humiliation like that. My groomsmen, on the other hand, they have my back completely. They have known me since we were all kids, and they remember exactly how messed up I was after the breakup. They were the ones who saw me at my absolute lowest, when I was fighting depression and barely making it through the day. They know what that woman meant to me and how badly she wrecked me, so they do not feel the slightest bit sorry for her. The way I see it, my fiancé's friend were probably hoping for some silly little reality show drama they could gossip about later. They were not ready for the real thing, the kind of pain and betrayal that leaves scars you do not ever forget. My fiancée has stood by me the whole time, though. She does not think I owe anyone an apology. But now her bridesmaids are saying if I do not apologize, they might not even show up for the wedding. That is putting me in a tough spot, because I know how much those friendships mean to my fiancée. At the same time, I cannot imagine sitting down and apologizing to the woman who destroyed me just to make her feel better. If she had left me alone, none of this would have happened. But she could not stand the thought of me being happy without her. To make things worse, she is still at it. She keeps making new accounts to send me more messages. She is acting like I broke her heart and ruined her life. And she is even saying karma is going to come after me for what I did. I do not have the patience for that kind of emotional blackmail. Not from her, and definitely not from my fiancé's bridesmaids. The thing is, my fiancé would never ask me to apologize just for her sake. But now I feel like I might have to, just to keep the peace. That is why I am here, trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, because time is running out, and I need to decide real fast. I guess you could say things have been pretty split over whether or not I handled all this the right way. There's only one day left before the wedding, so I figured it was time to sit down and have a real conversation with my fiancé about all of this, just like a lot of people had suggested. I laid it all out for her, told her exactly how I was feeling about everything, and right away, she told me something that made me feel a whole lot better. She said I did not owe my ex-girlfriend a single word of apology, no matter what her bridesmaids thought. If they had a problem with how I handled it, they could go ahead and skip the wedding entirely. My fiancé also explained that her bridesmaids had never actually heard the whole story. Most of them only knew the basic outline and thought I had taken things too far. Even when she tried to explain that my ex and I had been together for 10 full years and that she cheated on me with my own brother right before our wedding, they still acted like I was the one in the wrong for humiliating her. Eventually, my fiancé gave up trying to explain it. She flat out told them they did not have to come if they felt that strongly about it. She has not spoken to any of them since yesterday, and honestly, it is looking more and more like they're going to sit this one out. One of them even went so far as to send my fiancé the money for the bridesmaid dress she had already bought for her, which pretty much confirmed that they were all planning to bail. My fiancé is putting on a brave face for my sake, but I can tell it is eating at her. These are women she has been friends with since they were teenagers. Even though she says it does not matter, I know it hurts. That is why I decided I was going to try talking to them myself. Meanwhile, my ex-girlfriend has not let up one bit. Just a couple of hours ago, she somehow got my number and called me directly. She spent over 15 minutes rambling at me, saying all kinds of ridiculous stuff. According to her, the only reason I went to such lengths to embarrass her was because I was still secretly in love with her. I was just too stubborn to admit it to myself. If I'm being honest, there's still some kind of feeling left inside me when I think about her. But it sure as hell is not love. It is pure hatred and disgust for what she did. For some reason, she is convinced that I only showed up to see her again because I needed one last look at her to feel closure. She even tried to say that is why I held her hands during that conversation at the hotel. In reality, I did that just to mess with her even more. I even laughed right in her face while she was talking, but somehow none of that got through her thick skull. She just kept rambling about how we were meant to be together and how I was making a huge mistake by marrying someone else. The only reason I am even giving her the time of day at this point is because I am worried she might do something crazy. I've been trying to get a hold of her parents so they can step in and take her back home before things spiral even further, but so far, no luck. I am just waiting to hear back from them. Once they pick her up, I can finally wash my hands of all this for good. Do not get me wrong. I cannot stand her, but that does not mean I want anything bad to happen to her. I'm not that heartless. Update 2. Well, it is official. My wife and I are married now. It has only been a couple of days since the ceremony, and honestly, I still cannot believe it. It feels good to finally call her my wife. Unfortunately, not everything went as planned. None of her bridesmaids showed up to the wedding, no matter how many times I tried reaching out to them. I personally called each and every one of them, explained the whole story from start to finish, including why I handle things with my ex the way I did, but none of it made any difference. Even when I asked them to come for my wife's sake, they made it clear they were not interested. That was pretty confusing to me, because if the situation was flipped, I would still show up to support a friend, even if I could not stand the person they were marrying. It was not until yesterday that I finally got the full story from my wife. She admitted that she had a feeling her friends were not going to come, no matter what I said or did. It had nothing to do with me apologizing to my ex. It was all because of something way more petty. It turns out my wife and her friends have always treated their group like they were part of some little club. They believed everyone needed to agree on everything and present a united front, no matter what. When my wife stood up to them, when she told them she was on my side and not theirs, they saw that as her betraying the group. That is all it took for them to decide they were out. My wife tried to act like it was no big deal, but I know it hurt her. These are friends she had since high school. They had been through a lot together, and this was the first time they ever faced something real that made them pick sides. My wife picked me, and they did not like that one bit. As much as it stings, there's a silver lining. My wife admitted that part of her is actually relieved they showed their true colors. She spent so many years trying to fit in with them, constantly worrying about what they thought and if they would approve of her decisions. Now, for the first time, she feels like she can just live her own life without chasing their approval every step of the way. On a different note, my ex-girlfriend's parents finally got back to me the night before the wedding. I had called them and explained everything, how their daughter had been acting, how she showed up out of nowhere, and how I was genuinely concerned for her safety. I told them they needed to come get her and bring her home before something went really wrong. Apparently, they had been off on some kind of hiking trip where they did not have any cell service, so they did not get my messages until they were back. They promised me they would go get her as soon as possible and even thank me for looking out for her, which felt a little weird, but I guess they were just trying to be polite. I have not heard from them since, so I'm assuming they followed through and took her back home. Either way, I am officially married now, and I can finally put all this behind me. Update 3. Hey everyone. So it has been about a week since my wedding, and unfortunately, things have been nothing but chaotic ever since. Like I mentioned before, my ex-girlfriend's parents were supposed to step in and handle her after all that drama before the wedding. After I talked to them, I figured they would come get her, and I could finally move on, but I guess I gave them too much credit. 2 nights ago, my wife and I were winding down for the night when there was a loud knock at the front door. It was pretty late, so neither of us had any clue who it could be. I made the mistake of opening the door without checking the cameras first, and as soon as I did, my ex barged right in, dragging her suitcases behind her like she was moving in. My wife was sitting on the couch, and the second my ex stepped into the room, my wife jumped up completely caught off guard. I was about to ask my ex what on earth she was doing here, but before I could get a word out, she looked me dead in the eye and said she was back to stay. She went on to explain that her parents had shown up a few days earlier to try and take her home, but she flat out refused to leave. According to her, there was no point in leaving because she just knew I was going to come to my senses and take her back. My wife and I stood there, stunned, trying to process what we were hearing. It felt like something out of a bad sitcom, only it was happening right in our living room. My ex told us she had gotten into a huge argument with her parents, refused to go with them, and ended up staying at the same hotel she had booked before. The problem was her money was running out. So in her mind, the logical solution was to move herself into my house. She said she was sure if we spent some time together again, I would remember how much I used to love her and realize I was making a huge mistake marrying someone else. I stood there completely speechless. I mean, what was I even supposed to say to something like that? My wife, being the calm and patient woman she is, tried to talk to her directly, but my ex just ignored her like she was not even in the room. She kept talking only to me as if my wife did not exist, saying she was not asking, she was demanding to stay in my house. I did my best to be as gentle as I could, telling her that I was a married man now, and there was no way she could just show up and move in. Her response? She said she did not recognize the wedding as real. So to her, I was still single. I could not believe this was my life. As crazy as it all sounded, I could also see just how unwell she was. There was no way I could physically throw her out, especially since she was clearly in some kind of mental crisis. I told her to sit down in the living room while my wife and I went to the bedroom to figure out what the hell we were supposed to do next. Luckily, my wife is the understanding type. She could see, just like I did, that my ex was not in her right mind. This was not just jealousy or bitterness. This was something deeper. It was obvious she needed professional help. I tried calling her parents again, but this time they would not even pick up the phone. Instead, they sent me a text saying they were done trying to force her to do anything. They said it was clear she was beyond their control, and they could not have her living with them anymore. They said, plain and simple, that she was on her own. It was honestly disgusting to see her own family wash their hands of her like that. I get that she was acting unhinged, but she was still their daughter. It was shameful seeing them give up on her so easily. With no other options, I called my parents. They were at my house within 30 minutes. In the meantime, my ex had fallen asleep right there on the couch, which honestly was a small blessing. It made everything a little easier to deal with. Once my parents arrived, we all agreed the only thing to do was get her to a doctor. At that point, we had no clue what she was capable of, and none of us felt safe just leaving her to her own devices. My wife and I let her stay that night because, truthfully, we felt too sorry for her to kick her out onto the street. By that point, I could not even be angry anymore. It was just sad. Something inside her had completely broken, and she clearly needed more help than anyone around her knew how to give. Even her own parents had decided she was not worth the trouble. The next morning, my parents and I took her to the hospital. Even while sitting in the car, she kept talking about how happy she was that I was finally coming around and how she had already started planning our wedding, not mine and my wife's. Once we got to the hospital, the doctors recommended she see a mental health specialist right away. She refused at first, insisting that there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. It took a lot of back and forth, and eventually the doctors gave her something to help calm her down. They gave her a couple of medications I do not remember the names of, but within an hour or two, she was noticeably calmer. Eventually, she even said she was ready to go home. My wife and I drove her back to her house. She barely said a word the entire ride, and to be honest, neither did we. There was nothing left to say. When we got to her house, she stood there awkwardly for a minute, then apologized to both of us for all the trouble she had caused. She even admitted she was ashamed of herself. My wife and I felt awkward too. I mean, how do you even respond to something like that? We told her it was okay, wished her well, and drove off. Later that night, I reached out to her mother again and told her everything that had happened, from start to finish. I do not know if it was me laying it all out like that, or if seeing their daughter up close finally made them realize how serious it was. But her mother promised me they would take over from there. She said she was moving in with her daughter to keep an eye on her and promised to keep us updated. As much as I hate everything that has happened, my wife and I both genuinely hope she gets the help she needs. Whatever else she did, nobody deserves to spiral like that without anyone to lean on.